On today's show, I sat down with my longtime friend Solomon, and we discussed everything from Star Wars to Spider-Man and Marvel, the Joker trailer, video games, and science fiction novels. So join us as we travel with my digital recorder over to the Fortress of Solitude to interview Solomon on this episode of Free Your Geek.
By the power of Grayskull.
You have failed this city. Torpitize! Protocol.
Winter is coming.
Finish him. Fatality.
And welcome to Free Your Geek. I am your host, Jay Free, and with me is a special guest that we're going to be calling Sol, but his name is Solomon. He's been a friend of mine for a long time. We've been, like 20 years now, give or take?
20-year anniversary, 20-year reunion's coming up, so junior high?
Junior high, so yeah, probably like 20, 25 years. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy, but glad to have you on the show. I know you're an avid listener. We got so many things to talk about. I want to just kind of get right into it. Let's just, for the listener, tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you geek out for? Like, what are some of your hobbies, your interests, and what kind of attracts you to those particular things?
So anything space, I'm a big space geek. Got started Star Trek, Star Wars. Actually led me to my profession for a while. I was an engineer on ships, a little too Geordie LaForge wannabe. Not as interesting as hunting aliens, and we didn't have phasers and stuff on the ship, but spent 4 years on ships as an engineer. Avid reader. I started with Dr. Dolittle, and then got into Tolkien, Forgotten Realms, and then into anything of the new genres up through, we were talking about Ready Player One, which is my new book that you must read if you pick up books. And, cartoons as a kid, started with He-Man and Thundercats and just didn't shy away from it, didn't come up with something better to watch on TV. 90210 didn't grab me. I just kept watching cartoons.
You weren't a Brenda Walsh fan?
No.
I do want to go back. You said from your book, so you mentioned Tolkien. What do you think of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and then the Hobbit movies?
So The Hobbit was one of the first books that I remember reading all the way through as a kid. I really enjoyed it. I loved Peter Jackson's take on both of them. The Hobbit trilogy felt a little pulled, and they add a little bit more. I definitely could have seen it in 2 movies.
You think it was spread a little too thin?
They added a lot to get 3 movies. I think it was just...
My reference was going to be like butter spread across too much bread.
Yeah, I think they also added some Nutella and stuff in there, so it wasn't even like it was spread too thin. They added some new characters. And
for those listeners that are unfamiliar with the reference, go watch. Oh my God, what's the name of the first movie? Fellowship of the Ring. Go. That's what Bilbo says to Gandalf. He feels spread too thin, like butter spread across too much bread.
Yeah.
So that's my geeky reference.
He's too old for his own good.
So of the movies, the trilogy, you enjoyed. Is there a favorite character that you had book and then that was done? How do you feel that was done in the movie version?
I actually really liked Bilbo in the movie. I think he translated well from the books. There was actually an original cartoon that they did back in the 80s of The Hobbit, and they didn't mention the Arkenstone and the whole jockeying for control of the mines and everything. So I think they did really good with that. They added like the giant worms and stuff, which was kind of weird for the Battle of the Five Armies at the end. But I enjoyed the dwarf riding the pig. I mean, that's always hilarious to watch.
There was no Tom Bombadil. in the movies. What were your thoughts on that? Was he a cat? Like for me, he never grabbed me when I read the books. I read the books in college, and I was never a Bombadil fan. But
yeah, I didn't love his character, and then they expanded. Like I said, they added the female elf, which is fine, and they kind of expanded on the bard in the river town. So that was, added a lot more to that. And the dragon, it wasn't just like a bow and arrow. So that was interesting. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it was great. I mean, I've watched it 2 or 3 times. It's just, they're long. Mm-hmm. But I mean, even the books, when you read like the 2 Towers, in the middle was kind of drawn out and it was long, but the movies were, iconic. I mean, I'm going to go to New Zealand just because I want to see.
You're going to go check out the Shire.
You got to go.
That's like on the bucket list.
Yeah.
I love that. For me, I loved Gimli in the movie. I don't know. This can actually segue into our next talk because once I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, I was immediately drawn to dwarf class or the dwarf race, and I played a dual class thief and fighter thief, and I had a dwarf named Oscar the Grouch. That's my whole campaign for the last 12 years. I know you mentioned you're big into D&D.
Yeah.
We mentioned that you depending on the type of campaign, you have a number of different classes that you like to play just for different power sets or capabilities.
Yeah, I frequently would. When I started out in more of a ranger class, obviously. Drifting into Aragorn, and then in Forgotten Realms there's a very popular character, a dark elf called Drizzt, who's a dark elf, which are technically evil in Forgotten Realms in the Faerun universe, and then he leaves that whole life, and the author is R.A. Salvatore, who's a Massachusetts-based author who writes tons of books. He's done Star Wars, he's done Forgotten Realms, he has his own universes that he's created. So his character is in over 30-something books that I'm current with. I read him very frequently, who's a ranger. And then I drifted more into the spellcaster as I played more, having more variations of attack. So I drift into the druid class, weather stuff.
That's interesting.
Support character.
Because I always think of if you're kind of new to the game or like an RPG such as D&D, and I play classic, first edition. Typically you start off with either a magic user or a fighter because that's typically what you're accustomed to, but we moved on to psionics and just that's once you get a better handle on how to play the game and what the mechanics of the game are when you have that new character. I think that's super fun. So there's a couple of different people we graduated high school with that play, and we can talk a little bit offline because I don't know if you know all the people that play, but I don't want to give shouts out here if they're not comfortable there. But and I love that you mentioned Geordie LaForge too right off the bat. So you're a Next Generation versus original Star Trek type of guy?
Well, it was on when I was younger. Next Generation was on I think it was on 3 different syndications. You could catch 3 episodes in a night. And he, for LeVar Burton, for those that don't know him, you're living under a rock. But, Reading Rainbow, he was... Roots. He was in Roots, just so prevalent in TV, and then he went on to direct and stuff. But I mean, Reading Rainbow, and how much you would see him on that when I was younger, and then he was also in Star Trek, and he was always the logical person that I lean more towards I gravitate towards more the logical problem solving, and it was just always something I enjoyed. I was always on the water and on boats and ships, and it was, the person in the, everybody wants to gravitate towards Worf and Riker, and you're like, I'm more towards, I'm just going to fix all.
Well, that being said, did you see the Picard trailer?
I did.
What thoughts on that?
I don't know who's running it. I mean, visually it looks really good. They teased at a lot of things, I think, to try and grab as many people as possible, right? Because they showed 7 and 9, and I enjoyed Voyager. They showed Data. I'm trying to figure out, was Troy in I think?
I don't recall that.
But, I mean, they grabbed a bunch of people from the different genres. I think 7 and 9 was teasing the board because that's how they kept Voyager. You know, Voyager was kind of losing people, and they're like, okay, let's throw the Borg in because everybody loves the Borg, and we can get 3 or 4 seasons of pulling people in, right? It's like Deep Space Nine, they start to lose people. Like, we're going to throw in Worf and a war, and we'll keep people through 7 seasons. So.
Yeah, I know that guy. I recognize that.
Yeah,
guy.
okay, I'm back in because
Right.
I'm all about that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So yeah, so we talked, pretty much, the whole sci-fi type of thing, and even just more like the fantasy type thing with D&D, and then you mentioned your love of novels. If you had to pick one franchise that's like that, kind of like everything they've done, like I'm on board every single time. Would it be like more of a Star Trek? Would it be a Star Wars, or would it be more like the we talked a little Star Wars earlier offline, and we're going to talk about going there, and we're going to talk about some different trailers that might have dropped as well, and the Mandalorian. I know you said you were excited about that, but is there one that you're just kind of like, this symbolizes like my passion for like this whole area of like nerd or geekdom, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, growing up with comic books, I really gravitate towards Marvel, and there was a point where Marvel has just kind of stepped up. Like at the end of the 90s, they were doing a lot. They were putting out a lot of comics. They had the good cartoons, right? We grew up with the X-Men and the Spider-Man cartoons, which were, you didn't even believe they could pull that off, right? I mean, they would come on at 11 o'clock on Saturday, and I'm trying to figure out how to stay home so I can watch it at 11 o'clock on Saturday mornings. Because for those of you that don't know, back in the day, you couldn't just on-demand stuff.
There was no such thing as DVR.
Yeah, there was. You could set up your VHS recorder on your TV, and if somebody went in and mucked with the channels, and you automatically were where you were recording Antique Roadshow instead of the 11 o'clock X-Men that you wouldn't see again for 2 weeks.
Right.
So no, Marvel has always been for me. When you don't fit in. Even the people that are idolized in the comics still don't fit in. And I think that really connects with a younger audience that's still trying to find themselves. Star Trek is great, but the early stuff, the universe was too clean. Star Wars is amazing. I love Star Wars. It's such a small slice in the movies where, like, I've read the books and they just go so much farther. I mean, I can't say enough. Read books, because you get the internal workings of the character's brain, and you get more of what they're going for than you can fit into a 3-hour movie.
I actually really like that. I think you're one of the first guests that we've had in the 3+ years we've been doing this that are like, yeah, I'll read the books. Like, don't just go see the movie of it. Read the book. Like, I think that's really cool, because to your point, you can get into, if you're passionate about that and you want to kind of get into, like you said, like kind of like the headspace of the characters, or just get more, if it's a world that you're really passionate about, or universe you're really passionate about, and you get all the little other intricacies that you're like, oh my God, this kind of makes this world that much more like involved in my mind. I can paint that image to it. To your point, it's not just like, I liken it to like watching fireworks. Watching a movie is like watching fireworks. Boom, it's visually, but it doesn't really like grip you as much as, like, it doesn't make you feel as much internally, because you're not playing it all through your brain. You're just visualizing it a lot more than you're actually internally like running through it. So to your point with the books, same thing with the comics. I love certain points. We're going to talk about some Marvel stuff and some DC stuff, but when you read the books and then you see it on the big screen, or maybe even on like one of the Netflix shows or coming soon to Disney Plus, and you see like, oh, it's taking a nod from the comic books. There's a certain thing that's like, oh, I remember reading that, and I remember how, like, we talked about Spider-Man earlier, that you're a big fan of Spider-Man, and to me it's like, to your point, when you can relate to certain characters such as Spider-Man, like, here's a guy with all the powers in the world, but he's got that Parker luck where nothing seems to go right for him. And then even they kind of allude to a lot of it in the Sam Raimi movies, where he's delivering pizza and he's late and he's trying to hold all these jobs, and it's just like, he's got the powers of Spider-Man, but he can't really like use them because of his moral code, and it's to me, I think it's just very interesting that you can almost glean from these books, whether it's, comic books or novels or whatnot, the inspiration and just the passion of the characters, and it draws a bigger, I don't know, it draws more emotion, I think, out of you as a fan of the genre when you can kind of get into that depth. And I'm just kind of rambling now, so yeah, go for it, bro.
It's more the what's not special about them, right? Like that's what people gravitate towards. Like even they have all this going for them, and you might one day have everything going for you, but you're still gonna have issues. It's like the show that you watch where people win the lottery and their life is still just a dumpster fire at times.
Yeah.
And you have everything going for you. I mean, I love DC. I think they have some good stuff on DC Universe, and the shows that are doing better are the struggles, right? Like even, Justice League had its ups and downs, Aquaman, ups and downs, but it's the struggles that define people more than, hey, somebody gave me a magic ring and I'm good to go.
Right. And I think to your point too, from the Marvel versus DC side, Marvel to an extent has a lot of those characters with their flaws. Like you talked about the X-Men cartoon. Basically they're born different than other people, so that's why they're hated on. And you can use that kind of like example for anything going on in the world right now, whether it's a religious belief, sexuality, race, anything. Like, I don't like you because you're different. And X-Men's, kind of like the figurehead for that, as far as those kids that feel like they don't fit in, or feel like, oh, because people don't like me because I'm different, because I might have a different belief, because I might have a different ethnicity. And it's one of those things where it's like the X-Men's kind of like that symbol, like, hey, we can all work together and have this like peaceful existence. And but then you kind of veil that with like, oh, this guy can shoot lasers out of his eyes, this guy's got claws, and this one can control the weather. And I just think it's a really, really cool concept. And it's just, Stan Lee, like, and you go listen to interviews, he's just like, I just made them that way because I didn't want to think of another way for them to get powers. And it's just like, they're born this way. And but it works on so many levels that people can identify with, and just everything else with, like, from the Hulk to, the Punisher, and just like you talk about him, like as far as his motivation and, in any other semblance of the real world, this is the guy that the cops would, be after, because he's a vigilante, because he's taking lives. But you see his background, you can actually sympathize a lot with him. And that to me, it like makes like for the better stories when you can like sympathize with certain characters and understand their motivations for doing what they do.
Yeah, I think the best stories, they say, like, examines the gray area. Like, there's no easy answer when you go into anything that's black and white. Like, that's a bad guy. Well, I mean, he's bad, but he has motivations. And it's funny because, everyone says it, and I say it, the older we get, the more we empathize with some of these bad guys. I rewatched Fallen Down the other day. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
I haven't.
With Kirk Douglas.
I have not seen it.
Oh, it's super 80s movie. He like gets fired from his job and just starts this dumpster fire of an afternoon where he's like, his car breaks down and he starts wandering through East LA through like the gang sections, and his day gets worse and worse, and you think he's like a bad guy. At the end of the day, you're like, I mean, I could see that happen to me.
Well, and that's the thing. Even like these villains, that especially Marvel's done a really good job for in their movies and whatnot. A lot of the villains that they have out there, like you look at somebody like probably the most prominent villain in the Marvel movies right now that's been in the most of them is Loki. And you look at where he's come from, in the sense that, Loki essentially was, taken as a child, brought into this world, and he's like always felt like he wasn't loved, and him and Thor weren't necessarily equals, and Thor was always the chosen one. And you can kind of get that motivation where he's just trying to like do his own thing and kind of like prove himself and rule and he wanted to rule Asgard, and he just didn't have the same checks and balances that Thor did. Or like, we can talk about like the way Marvel uses its villains as like secondary characters, but like somebody like Baron Zemo in Winter Soldier. Was it Winter Soldier? No, Civil War.
Civil War, yeah.
Civil War, where it's just like, his family was killed by the Avengers. How does that make you a bad guy? You know what I mean? Like, to your point, you can empathize a lot more with them in that shades of gray area.
Yeah. I mean, I know you talked about The Boys.
Yeah,
I finished The Boys. Yeah, I finished that. Yeah. That was a 2-day binge watch. I mean, Carl Urban, from Dr. McCoy to Judge Dredd to, Billy Butcher now, and you not going to spoil it for anybody, but you'll be waiting on bated breath for the second season
absolutely.
to start.
No, and I think we're past the point. If you anything, we're going to say anything we're going to talk about, be prepared for spoilers because we're going to go into some heavy stuff here. But yeah, The Boys, I have the Don, a friend of the show, and most times co-host of the show. He'll be back, I think, next week. But he loves it. He's a big fan of Homelander. He just loves how deliciously evil he is, and I couldn't stand him. And I'm just like, that kind of says all you have to say. Like, you know,
I watched that show and I thought, you know, more often than not, given the certain ways that certain people in the world work, if that was the situation, it would be pretty true to form.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
There would easily be that group that would exploit them for that. I had to go lighthearted, so I don't know. Did you watch The Tick on Amazon?
No, I love the animated series. Going back to our talk about animated series, to me it was X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman the animated series, and The Tick. Like those are like the staples as a kid. But yeah, I need to check out that show. It's on the queue.
So we'll do like 5 minutes of talking about The Tick now.
Yeah, go for it.
So the first season is great. It's twisted. They play with people with, you know, The Tick has a little bit of a head thing going on. Mm-hmm. They play with that, and they play true to some of the original characters, but not all of them. Like they bring back the Terror. It's light, but it's also true to the superhero form. And I'm trying to remember who plays the Tick. I know Warburton played in the original, but the cast is great. I'm into the second season now. It's totally different from The Boys, but a great show. If you've watched the original, The Tick. Christmas episode is my favorite episode with multiple Santa. Like they always have like Christmas time. I love to go through all the Christmas episodes. The Tick versus multiple Santa is, I think, the funniest Christmas episode of shows.
I'm not going to even try to pronounce his name. Peter Serafinowicz. I don't.
Is who plays the Tick?
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah. I can't pronounce that name, but. How does he do as? I
mean, I liked Warburton when he played him, but I think he does a really good job as the Tick. The mannerisms, always, you know, a little bit of a weirder hero, right? Kind of like tongue-in-cheek superhero, but still borderline indestructible and heart in the right place no matter what, almost like a child with superpowers, you know? So I hope it goes longer. You know, Amazon has all this money. They've got Lord of the Rings coming out. They got The Boys, which is doing great. Now they got The Tick season 2. People are talking about they're just pumping out shows like it's going out of style. So hopefully people watch it so that they keep it on.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that you watch that I haven't, and I want you to kind of sell me on, is Voltron.
Oh, so this comes from the discussion I was having with you on open or don't open collectibles, right?
Yes.
So I didn't really get into Power Rangers. I used to laugh because I have a younger cousin who's 7 years younger than me. So he was big into Power Rangers growing up, and I just looked at him and went, they're just rebranding Voltron, right? So the series came out on Netflix, I want to say like 3 or 4 years ago. DreamWorks did a really good job adapting it to the new technology of CGI and keeping true to the original, not just using it as a marketing tool for selling toys, which we all know, you know, 90% of cartoons is about selling toys. So they'll change up like the vehicles every year and stuff. Voltron was always just the 5 lions. Once again, takes place in space, love space. If you go on Netflix, you can watch the original series. I think there's a dozen of the original episodes that are super campy from the 80s, partially not PC, that they use to influence the new show. But I think if anybody likes Power Rangers, they once again, they focus more on the people's flaws and how when they work together, you can't do anything alone, right? They're not like one Power Ranger goes off and does his own thing. It's a big...
they all have their specific set of skills, almost, if you will. And like some of them have their own shortcomings, but you have somebody else to pick up from those shortcomings, and that's an area they're stronger in, and they might be weaker somewhere else. And
yeah, and then they go into, so there's a whole galactic empire that's trying to take over everything, and they're trying to let people maintain their independence and choose who they want to control their destiny and everything. So they have this, the whole, bad guys are universally bad guys that are trying to take over. So anyone that, if you like Power Rangers, you have to give Voltron a shot because it was a natural evolution, right? Like you can't say you like new Mustangs, but you don't like the 60s Mustangs because there would be none without the other. Right. And then when you watch it and you're like, oh, that's totally, it's funny, the Power Rangers, when they had the guys in suits fighting, Voltron was all cartoon, DreamWorks made it into CGI. We were talking about one of the age-old, like, children of the 80s versus children of the 90s. Who would win, Voltron or the Power Rangers? YouTube did it. Voltron won. I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
I'm not diving any deeper. But it's good. It's good to have that fun argument with the childrens of the 90s and the 2000s that are still living with, I don't know, like Power Rangers group number 25 or something.
Well, I'll give a quick shout out to a YouTube channel called Bat in the Sun. Not sure if you've ever gone there, but they actually do they have fan votes and they pit two characters against each other, and then they do a live action reenactment of the fight of how it would go. And I'll show you a video once we get offline what they do, but it's actually really good. They have Jason David Frank, who played the Green Ranger on Power Rangers. He's in a bunch of them, so it'd be like Ryu versus Tommy from Power Rangers, and just things like that. They had, I believe, Nathan Drake from the Uncharted series versus Lara Croft, and just they did live action. They cast actors and actresses, and they do all the special effects and stuff. And it's definitely fan made, but it's so good. It's so good. It's hosted, and they have a vote, and they go to all these different cons, and they start questioning people who go to the cons who would win in a fight, and it's a really cool series, and they have tons of different videos. I'll show you when we get offline. But speaking of different characters, I want to talk. We did say that you're more of a Marvel person than DC. Let's just go favorite hero and favorite villain in both, if you could, or at least some of your favorites. Who did you? Obviously, we kind of talked about Spider-Man, but how about other Marvel heroes you kind of gravitate toward? So
Spider-Man and Iron Man, I always gravitated towards. The comics, I had big into Spider-Man really early on. My grandfather was a newspaper photographer, so he was a photographer and always struggling as Spider-Man. Iron Man and his ability to, take what was inherently a weakness of himself, and he was failing, but his mind and his intelligence was how he went about changing it. And in the comics, which they didn't show in the movies, he was borderline for a while, destructive alcoholic.
Yes.
To the point of probably couldn't have walked without the suit, not from physical, but just being drunk. So he had a very, a lot of the characters take dark arcs, but he had a very self-destructive nature that he had to overcome. Not something you saw as much, DC people have incredible losses and stuff. He was self-destructive, and he was his own worst enemy, right? So he was always a tough. You root for him, and you hope that they're gonna come out better off, or everyone else is better off. So it was funny when they cast Robert Downey Jr. because I thought in the movies he was going to be an alcoholic, but they didn't really want to get into it too much. So favorite villains, I loved Galactus. I was always a Silver Surfer fan. He would go around and eat worlds. I had a bunch of Silver Surfer when he was a Herald of Galactus, and then when he wasn't. Obviously, he's never been portrayed well in the movies, right? They made him like a giant space bug in the Rise of the Silver Surfer movie, which was...
Well, now that the property's back on the Marvel side, I can't wait.
Yeah, did you see the... apparently there's a statue of them in the end of Endgame, not Infinity War. So apparently there's a statue. I haven't caught it.
No.
When Spider-Man's going through New York, there's a statue We'll have to look it up.
Yeah,
Somebody said there's an Easter egg for the Fantastic Four.
I'm gonna have to look that. Yeah, let's. If any listeners know about that, give us a shout. Either on Twitter, either on our Facebook page or Instagram, Free Your Geek on all of that. Let's look that up. Well, you talked about favorite villains.
Yeah.
Let's segue a little bit. Speaking of a villain, we have a villain on the DC side known as the Joker. And Joaquin Phoenix, the trailer dropped last week. Have you had a chance to check that out?
I did. I'm wondering what they're going to rate the movie. I'm hoping it's going to come in.
It's R.
Is it going to be R?
It's going to be rated
Okay.
R, yeah. And it's coming in October. So right around the corner as of this recording. Because we're starting beginning of September as of this recording. So we got about a month before it comes out. And I've seen it, and I just, Heath Ledger's portrayal has a special place in my heart. I never really got behind, and this is controversial, but I never really got behind the Jack Nicholson version. I liked it, but I was just never like, that was never the Joker to me. Like more of like this mobster. It was like the Joker was all like this, like he's this brilliant maniac. And that's what I thought Heath Ledger's version kind of like did a little nod to that. But this version, I think, I really love what they're going to do, because we always know that there's never one Joker origin story. Even in the comic books, like he lies about his origin all the time. So you could have the Jack Napier version. You could have, the Heath Ledger version, how I get these scars. And then you can have this Joaquin Phoenix version where it's like he's trying to be a comedian, and it looks like they're going to be pulling a little bit from some of that Red Hood storyline, if you will. I don't know how much is going to be from that, but I know that there is going to be, I don't know if you heard, but there's going to be some Wayne's mentioned in the film. I don't know if it's going to be Bruce Wayne, but I think it might be his father or grandfather. I can't remember who's going to be part of it. So I'm just wondering how that's going to play out. Maybe Bruce Wayne's, still like a young man before his parents murdered me. I hope they don't go the route where Joker kills the Waynes like they did in the Burton Batman. But just that trailer though, what were your thoughts of seeing, like, what was your favorite part of that trailer?
I like when you empathize even with the villains, right? So you start off and you start feeling bad for him, and you put yourself in that position, and it's, would I react similarly, right? And you say he's trying to do right, and he's got a wife, and he's trying to do things, and nothing seems to go his way, which you find for the heroes, right? Nothing seems to go their way, and it's just this one little thing that could flip somebody between going to the left or going to the right. And you wonder, where are you going to end up when it's all said and done? The dark pieces, we were talking about, I'm not a horror movie fan, so that'll be my horror movie for the October. I'm not going to go see it too. You can enjoy it and tell me how creepy the clown was.
Absolutely.
But just dark enough for me, right? But the best characters, even when they're villains, like pull you in and you empathize with them. I like Jack Nicholson. I like the Burton Batmans because we weren't oversaturated with superheroes, and you were looking forward to it. And visually, it was great. The whole he killed his parents, trying to get everything to tie in, seems forced. Like you don't need to tie it up with a neat bow, right? Because if he killed the guy who killed his parents, wouldn't he just be done?
Right.
So I feel it's better to just say there's bad in the world, and you have to do something.
Right. And my opinion to that is, like, I like the driving force behind Bruce becoming Batman is this weapon, this gun killed my parents, so I'll never use this weapon. I will never kill because I know what it cost me. And it's just like the dichotomy going through his mind, like, this is what cost me everything, so I'm never going to use this to get justice. And I just think that's and again, this is the newer version. The older, like, it's Inception, Batman used to kill all the time. And then, this new thing is like more this noble, the last like 30, 40 years, whatever. But I really like the fact that, again, you're going into the psychology of the hero, of the villain. And for me, what grabbed me most, to your point, as far as empathizing and then just like seeing the way the mind of the person works, is there's a scene in the middle of the trailer where he's doing that maniacal laugh, and he turns the corner, and then his face just drops, and he just goes right back to a regular person. And I don't know if you recall that, but when you go back and watch the trailer again, that to me, I'm just like, this is going to be a freaking masterpiece in my mind, because it's just seeing that come full circle.
Yeah, and I mean, he was the Joker as a villain was fighting, I mean, a litany of mental issues, right? And they get into it more in the 90s where they introduce Arkham more prevalently and all the other people out there, that he's dealing with a lot of issues, but he's still so charismatic for being crazy, right? Like they go into, the 90s with the Batman show when they introduce Harley Quinn and he convinces her that he's not as crazy as he thinks, and he turns a supposedly mentally stable psychologist, right on her head and makes her bonkers too, right?
Yeah, no, it's to your point, and that's the thing. Is he insane, or is he actually really, really smart? And he's just, or I think I read somewhere saying he actually has a superpower, and it's like super insanity. So he sees his clarity is something that's so finite that's why he's insane. It's viewed as insanity, but that's his superpower, is that he's so smart and he's so conscientious, and he just knows, like he has this moment of clarity, and that's just, he can see everything for what it is, and that's what he's viewed as insane for. And I think that's actually kind of cool. I don't like him as a superpower per se, but just somebody that's like so smart that he's viewed as crazy.
Yeah, because I remember in one of the comic books they talk about how he's super smart, and when they go with the origin of he ends up in the chemicals, and it eliminates his ability to regulate his emotions and like push them down, right? And he's always a raw individual of just whatever's at the forefront of his mind emotionally, like this is how I have to solve things, this is how I'm going to behave, and there's no filter. He has no ability to repress any of that, and he does whatever he has to do to get by, and whatever he thinks is funny he's going to do, whatever he thinks is appropriate he's going to do, and there's no conscience, there's no internal control. He is just whatever he has to do to get by, he's going to do.
Hey everyone, I want to quickly tell you about 4041 Media. 4041 Media is a collection of podcasts in the southern New England area. And in addition to the great show that is Free Your Geek, you can check out 4041media.com and listen to the Psych Your Crime podcast to figure out why the crazies commit the crimes that they do. Or if movies are more your thing, check out the cast of characters at Movie Theater Time Machine. You can hear all of that at 4041media.com. That's 4041media.com. 4041 Media. For listeners, by listeners. And welcome back to the Free Your Geek podcast. And we are here with Saul. And we're going to switch hats a little bit. We were just talking about the Joker as far as being a villain you can empathize with. Let's talk about somebody that works within those shades of gray. Because there's a trailer that came out for Disney Plus that you're super into called The Mandalorian. And why don't you give me just your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on The Mandalorian and what you hope to see out of it.
So, well, like we talked about, I'm big Star Wars space geek. Boba Fett, obviously, teased at in the Empire Strikes Back. He was in A New Hope when they re-released the new cut with Boba Fett's with Jabba the Hutt, when they meet Jabba the Hutt for the first time in the recut from the 90s. And then obviously his father's in Attack of the Clones, Jango Fett. So, a prevalent character that didn't get enough of a backstory, but if you're into the extended universe at all, the Mandalorians, which is the planet that Jango Fett's from, obviously Boba Fett's a clone, just hugely prevalent in the Clone Wars series, in the books. So really excited. Jon Favreau's obviously directing it. I think they said 13 episodes.
I believe so, yeah.
So it's Disney Plus. I don't know how they're going to do the rating system. Really interested though, because the sets look amazing. Obviously they have a huge plethora of stuff to work with. Hoping that, as I talk with my fellow geeks, right, they talked about Obi-Wan, which is going to take place on Tatooine, and they show a lot of the planets look like we're starting off in those desert outer rim planets, which hopefully a lot of it will cross over set-wise. So you're talking about lower operating costs, more chances that they're going to continue the shows, right? When you're like, oh, will we see him go to Tatooine? Are we watching the trailer? Is the trailer Tatooine, right? You think of the minute you see a desert planet. It's Jon Favreau, not to say anyone is beyond reproach, but everything that he's touched recently has just been great. He has a light air to it, but it's serious when it needs to be. So really interested to see what he brings in. I like a lot of his stuff. The original Iron Mans, even his pre-Iron Man Marvel Universe should be really interesting. I got to watch a little bit of the behind the scenes. We were talking about one of my favorite shows from Joss Whedon from the 90s, Firefly, a similar space, that was almost a space western, right? So we're talking about a bounty hunter who's out there, and where's that gray area he's going to play in? Is he working for the Empire? Is he working for the Rebellion? Or is he just working for himself trying to get money? And you'll get into those gray areas of, I have to help people find this person, but are they being found for the wrong reasons? And in Star Wars, they underlie so much of the drugs and slavery and all these things that we're going to see that aren't going to be regulated because it's happening at the fall of the Empire and before the actual establishment of a new government for the entire galaxy. So it's just going to be a free-for-all. You'll see hopefully a lot of interesting stuff. They showed a lot of the gadgets, the grappling, and he has his blaster and he has a little missile launcher. So
the scene of the trailer that made it for me was that pod bay door closing, then it just cut away and we don't see what happens. I'm like, oh, I can't wait. And I think to your point, I believe Disney has come out and said nothing will be more than PG-13 on Disney Plus. So I think if there's going to be any harder, more mature stuff, it's going to make its way to Hulu as opposed to Disney Plus, because Disney now owns Hulu as well.
Right, because if you have Hulu, because Disney bought Fox, which Fox owns Hulu, it's $6 more a month to get Disney Plus.
Right.
But yeah, I don't think they're going to go beyond PG-13. They're not going to be into the HBO genre.
Right.
Star Wars After Dark, that would just be weird.
Let's see what's really happening in Jabba the Hutt's
palace.
Yeah.
I'm really excited. They said it was the largest budget of a TV show beyond what Amazon's going to probably spend on Lord of the Rings. But
right.
A lot of the set pieces and stuff are there. They have so much to pull from. I think they had IG-11. The assassin droid was in the... because it was IG-88 was the original one from some of the other shows. So same model, but a different droid. That should be interesting. We'll see, they talk about the Mandalorian's design going back to the original, I think it was the Christmas episode. He had that weird sniper rifle. So we don't know where it's going to come from, but it's kind of a known little universe, but you probably won't see people run around with lightsabers and whatnot. But the scene where he shoots the door controllers and it kind of closes on the guy, that was
sold.
hilarious.
I was sold. I was absolutely sold. And to your point, yes, I think Disney, for everything they're doing, they know what they're doing as far as spending this money. If they get the subscribers that they're going to be getting, I think everything, it's interesting because 10 years ago, we were talking about cable companies and, cable's too expensive. Now all these streaming, Netflix blew up, Hulu blew up. All this stuff is going to the streaming, technology's there. Now every company is going to have their own streaming service. So it's kind of almost like an a la carte, which streaming service you want to go with. And every single streaming service has amazing shows. But I think you have the intellectual property of Marvel and Star Wars on Disney Plus. I think it's, any geek they're going to have that, they're going to make their money back tenfold, I think, with Disney Plus. I mean,
it's like everything else with the reboots. It's getting the parents to, well, if I'm going to introduce my child to something, it's going to be something that I enjoy. So I have two little girls, and I introduced them to Ninja Turtles. Who doesn't love Ninja Turtles? I was born in the 80s. I tried watching the original series with them. So we started with the original, and I realized how un-PC it was.
Yeah.
They call each other retarded. They go way out of bounds. So we started watching the newer ones, which I think they changed for change's sake.
Right.
Once again, to make toys.
Right.
Which kind of made me a little apprehensive. I did enjoy Batman versus Ninja Turtles. I don't know. Did you see
Yes,
that one?
yes.
I don't know if you guys
That's
talked
awesome.
about it on
Yeah,
here.
we haven't talked about it yet.
Oh.
The comic we talked about, I think, a little bit in probably a few months or years back. But the movie, the movie's great. We haven't talked about it on the show though.
I wish they had used some of the original voice actors because we talked about the animated series Batman, and Mark Hamill is the Joker, just iconic voices that would have upped the level so much more. If you haven't seen the movie, watch the movie before you watch it with your kids. As a good parent, I always screen things.
Yep.
People get decapitated in that movie. It's a little more violent than you would think. So watch it before you watch it with your kids.
Gotcha.
I didn't let my 7-year-old watch it yet.
That's a little PSA for all you parents out there. I do want to talk about, though, speaking of Ninja Turtles, have you ever seen, speaking of like the 80s cartoon, have you seen the movie Turtles Forever? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Forever?
Was that the CGI one that came out?
Nope. It was an animated flick, and it was basically like it was the Nickelodeon version of the Ninja Turtles, but they meet all the past iterations. It's like a multiverse type thing.
Oh, no.
So they run into the 80s Ninja Turtles, and then they even run into the uber violent comic book black and white Ninja Turtles.
Oh, the all red mask Ninja Turtles?
Yeah, it's sick.
Oh, I'll have to check that one out.
It's definitely sick. I loved it because it had like a little bit more of the, I don't want to say realism, but it was like, to me, the 80s cartoon, it pokes fun at it. Like, oh, they're throwing like pizza and like, we're going to eat pizza with gummy worms and whatever and bubble gum. And these new iterations of the Turtles, like, what are these guys on? Like, what's wrong with these? And it's just like, it's one of those things where I just think it's such a cool melding of the different universes and generations of what you'd expect out of this product and this kind of the series of Ninja Turtles. And it's just like the current version versus the past version versus the original version. And it's so good.
Oh, I'll have to check that one out. They do in the iteration on Hulu right now. There's a newer one on Nickelodeon that my kids enjoy, but I do not. Splinter looks like a hamster. Mm-hmm. It's horrible. I'm sorry. It's horrible. But the other version that was on Nickelodeon for a while that was a little more true to form, they actually do a multiverse thing, and they see the Turtles from the 80s, and they wonder what's wrong with them in that show. And my kids look at me going, why does everybody look like that? It's like, this yellow jumpsuit was in fashion.
Right, absolutely. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because kind of tying that all together, we talk about the classics. The other thing I want to talk about is we want to talk about classic video games. And my only news bit, I had some stuff that I want to talk about Star Wars, about Anthony Daniels hinting at C-3PO's farewell and Rise of Skywalker. I mean, we've seen the trailer, we see his red eyes, so is he going to become a Sith or is he self-destructing? We don't know, but it's going to be emotional there. But I want to kind of finish off the podcast talking a little bit about video games. And our news bit that Disney's classic 90s Aladdin and the Lion King games are actually coming to the next-gen consoles, Nintendo Switch, the PS4, the Xbox One, and PC on October 29th. And it's going to be run MSRP of $29.99. So for $30, you're going to get this collection, which is developed by Nighthawk Interactive and Digital Eclipse, will include all the Sega Genesis and Nintendo Game Boy versions of Aladdin, along with something called the Final Cut in a trade show demo that hasn't been available since 1993. And then the Lion King will get the Genesis, Nintendo SNES, and Game Boy versions, all for $30 on this. So we talked about like going back and just, talking about stuff we grew up on. Again, child of the 80s versus child of the 90s, to kind of put a bow on this. I want to first get your thoughts on that, and then I want to kind of segue into what you're playing now, what systems you're using, whether it's PC, console. So let's just go back your thoughts. I know we kind of talked off air like how difficult those games were.
Oh yeah, I think I had the Lion King for my Game Gear, the original, which I still have, which was ridiculously hard. I don't think I ever got past the level where you have to run on top of the wildebeest after your dad gets run over. The horrible scene.
I can't
even watch the
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert! I haven't watched the live action Lion King because I just don't want.
But again, Jon Favreau.
Yes.
So there you go. Again, tie it all together.
Oh yeah. Did you see Jungle Book?
I have. I loved it.
Yeah,
I loved it.
That was great. So I loved Aladdin. We were talking. I still knew the code ABACABB. If anybody needs the code to cheat their way through Aladdin, I don't know if that'll actually be the code. was a fun game. I actually have a Raspberry Pi that I ripped, and I have about 6,000 games on an emulator on my Raspberry Pi over there that looks like a mini Nintendo. So I have all the original ones.
That's
and
awesome.
You go back and you don't realize how skilled you had to be at, like, you missed that rhythm of jumping, and then it was right back to the beginning, and no save games. You know, you talk about no second chances, and
All the way back to the beginning.
yeah, $30 for all those games. I mean, it's great that they can re-release this stuff that, people worked hard on back in the day and put a lot of time into it. And they're fun to play, but will I buy it? Probably not. They do, they love to re-release things, or they just go with the next iteration. We're talking, I'm a PlayStation 4 person as well, and PC. I actually started on PC because my parents wouldn't buy me consoles, but we were early adopters into the computer world. I was an early MMO person. I used to gold farm and all that stuff in high school. My parents would wonder where I was getting money from. People are paying you to play video games. But, some of my friends that we've moved to other parts of the country, we still game together because that's how we connect, instead of sitting down and watching, Vampire Diaries or one of those mindless shows. I'd rather.
I like how you went right to Vampire Diaries.
I know. It's a plug to one of my friends that whenever I talk to him, I'm like, what are you doing? Watching Vampire Diaries? I'm like, seriously?
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Just want to see Blade show up at the end and just kill everybody.
That is, and again, we didn't even talk about that. What do you think of the new Blade series? That's
one of the, back in the day, that was one of the early. You talk about reboots, and we kind of laughed about The Matrix. You'll probably talk about at some point. What are they rebooting? Because there's people out there that want to see it. You're going to see Blade. You're going to see Spawn. No offense to Black Panther, and everyone's like, first black superhero movie, and I'm like, I watched Spawn
right
many years ago, and it was a great franchise. The comic books were amazing. They were so dark when everything else was shiny and bright, and Image went just super dark and tried to distance themselves from the other oversaturated comic book market, right? So you had Image, and Malibu was the other comics that tried to get in there.
Top Cow, was that one? I can't remember. Was it Top Cow?
Top Cow?
Yeah,
I think that was in. Yeah,
I'm gonna have to look that
Image
up.
was Savage Dragon and Spawn, really dark, almost rated R comics. I mean, the scantily clad women and
Yeah,
overly.
Top Cow was like Witchblade.
Yeah.
That universe. So
They were trying to distance themselves, but it's funny when they talk about first black superhero movies, Black Panther, and I'm like, the Blade series with Wesley Snipes before he went
amazing,
totally off the map were great. They were borderline scary. They were vampire movies, which everybody liked, and he was. I mean, I thought he was great in all those. And you look back at the early '90s. Ron Perlman was in them. It wasn't Ryan Reynolds.
Ryan Reynolds was in. Yeah,
He was
him
in the
and
third
Jessica Biel.
Jessica Biel, right? We're in the third one. So, I mean, I'm excited for. I can never pronounce his name. Who's going to be
Shades,
Blade?
not Shades, Cottonmouth from Luke Cage. I don't know if you saw Luke Cage.
No, I watched.
He was
I watched Luke Cage.
Cottonmouth.
No, but who's playing Wesley? Who's playing Blade?
Yeah, it's the actor. I can't think of his name. Not Luke Cage, the guy that played Cottonmouth. I'm going to look it up.
No,
right
he's
now.
not playing Blade. The guy from Black Panther's playing Blade. You're thinking of Theo Rossi. Theo Rossi.
No. That was Shades. I'm thinking. We're going to get there, but no.
Oh, the guy who played Cottonmouth.
Cottonmouth.
Oh, okay, yes,
Cottonmouth
yes.
on Luke Cage.
Yes, and I forget how to pronounce his name. So I think that's going to be great. I just think that Marvel's doing an amazing job because when we were younger, the sequels were always worse, and they just seem to build on it and focus on the stuff that they know works, not just trying to pump something else out to make more money, right? Like
The actor you're thinking of is Mahershala Ali.
Okay, Mahershala.
Yeah.
So we'll call him Mersh.
This
Yes.
guy,
Yeah.
he's gonna. So I think I loved him in Luke Cage.
Yeah.
I thought I don't know much of his work, but I loved. He was the best part of that first season to me. Luke Cage playing Cottonmouth, like I thought he was great. So to see him step up and fill in his Blade, I think if they integrate it with the Marvel universe, I think they're going to be going. And we kind of talked offline. Doctor Strange 2 is going to be more of a horror type of genre. So I'm wondering if they're going to try to it looks like the next iteration, the next phase of the Marvel Universe might suit your interest, because there's going to be a lot of space, a lot of aliens, and then a lot of sci-fi, and then it's going to get into like vampires and shit. So
It's gonna be a lot of dark stuff.
Yeah.
Screen the movies before you take your kids.
yes, I agree, and we know that they're all going to be like PG-13, which, but again, you can still have a lot of. I love the fact that like you're such an advocate for like screening. Like, you don't hear a lot about that. I've gone to so many movies where it's just like people bringing their kids, and it's because they want to see it. They're not doing their due diligence for their children. It's kind of refreshing to hear and see that you're doing that for your daughters.
Yeah, I try and do it again one more time. It's weird to I have to explain to my daughters the scene in Revenge of the Sith when Anakin goes into the room with all the little kids, and I'm like, we're just gonna not talk about that.
He's doing some bad stuff, honey. He's becoming a bad guy.
He's shipping them all off to orphanages. So.
They're going to a farm upstate.
Yeah, total farm upstate action on that one.
Speaking of, I think we're going to go to a farm upstate. So I want to thank you, Saul, for being part of the podcast. Is there anything you want to plug? Anything?
Like I was telling you, you told me you got Firefly. I think we should end with reading list. Should be go read Ready Player One. If you're a child of the 80s, definitely pick up Ready Player One. Give it a read. It sucks you in. Go watch Firefly before The Mandalorian comes out. Such Nathan Fillion, Summer Glau, who was in the Terminator TV show. Jewel Straight, who's awesome. She goes on into Stargate SG-1. And I always forget Mara Schoen from Firefly, but it's Josh Whedon, for everyone who loves Josh Whedon. We were talking about offline the kind of the parallels with the space western, where it's a big gray area that they kind of live in this gray area of space, trying to make it living outside of an overarching government. So put that one in. That one definitely sucks you in. And then we'll get together again. Maybe we'll talk more games.
Yeah, we'll talk games. We'll have to start. I'll give you my username after this. But as far as For Your Geek goes, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're on iTunes. We're on Stitcher. We're on Spotify. Go check out our affiliates at 4041media.com. You can listen to some other great shows there. And until then, folks, until next time, get your geek on.
You're still here. It's over. Go home.